1 minute to start. Just prepare. When it is live, I will introduce you and then we can start. Can we shut down this one? Close it.
Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like today to introduce our colleague and guest, Dr. Fred Monderson. Dr. Fred Monderson, this is not the first time for him in Ghana. This is number third. And last time he was talking about many topics about the virus. And this time he will talk about the priest and purification in Egyptian temples. Dr. Fred Monderson, one of the most famous editors in American protein specifically. He wrote more than 25 books about ancient Egyptian civilization. One of the most important one is about Karnak temples, and one called The Majesty of Egyptian Gods and Temples, a book of Egyptian poetry. And some other books like Temple of Karnak, Majesty Architecture of Ancient Kemet, and also a book called We Are the Kemet Kings, and one talking about the Hatshepsut temples at the Bahrain. Dr. Fred Monderson today he will talk about the priest and purification in Egyptian temples. Please welcome Dr. Fred Monderson in Karnak.
Good morning. I am Frederick Monderson, and I would like to present today what I consider the third lecture in Karnak Temple in honor of Dr. Ben Johanna. He brought me to Karnak in the mid-80s, 1980s, and I've been coming here ever since. I've been here in the 90s, and for the new century, I've been at Karnak in 03, 05, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17. So I'm somewhat familiar with some of the people and the monuments. As I said, today the theme is priests and purification in Egyptian temples. I'm not going to specifically relate to Karnak Temple because Karnak Temple is different in many ways. There are at least two types of temples. There are the temples that are built by a single individual, such as Deir el-Bahari, Ramesseum, Medinet Habu, Abu Simbel. Karnak was built by several kings. So the same strictures that apply to even the temple of Ramses III in the Great Court, those types of temples do not apply specifically to Karnak because Karnak is a temple that took 2,000 years to build. So we classify it as vegetative construction. That is, it's growing to its final form, which takes that 2,000-year period from the Middle Kingdom onto the time of the Greeks and the Romans. There is evidence that Karnak actually goes back much earlier than the Middle Kingdom. As you know, most of Karnak is not fully excavated. So therefore, there have been found remains that date Karnak to the 2nd and 3rd dynasty. So we're looking at 2900. Karnak gained prominence at the beginning of the Middle Kingdom when the Thebans, you see, this area, Luxor, the Arabs call it Luxor, the Greeks call it Thebes, the Egyptians call it Waset, the scepter, the fighting province. So, and as you know, most of the monuments, the ancient monuments, is in this area. So Thebes, Luxor, is a special area, very, very special. That's why you get so many visitors. Regarding the priestly bureaucracy, first of all, we need to know who were the priests, how they got their jobs, and what were their functions. So, regarding the priestly bureaucracy, Flinders Petrie, an English archaeologist, is considered the father of Egyptian archaeology. He has indicated that the office of the priesthood and the priest was developed from civil, not religious functions. In the prehistoric period, and we must remember that Narmer united Upper and Lower Egypt to form the first dynasty. But there was activity before Narmer. So in this prehistoric period, the priests were called servants of the god. Later, the organization became a professional body, and they had different functions. So there were titles such as Great Man of Medicine, Chief Commander of Workmen, and Inundation Man. Those are different titles. In defense of the country, the nation, the state, they were splendid, general, warrior, guardian of the and leader of the Mesenu soldiers of Horus. And in religion, they were the tongue of the God, the Lord of speech, the Lord of true speech, opener of the gates of management, hider of sins, servant of the cow. The cow had been either Hathor or Isis, and guardian of the king. There were female and male priests and priestesses. The order of male priests were, first of all, in the establishment of the state, the king became the first priest. And I'm going to talk about the functions of the priest. So at the top of the priesthood bureaucracy was the pharaoh. He was a high priest. He was the chief of the divine servants. He was called the Neter Hemter. Then below him was the Sem priest. The Sem priest conducted the feasts and worship of the king. He's the same person who did the opening of the mouth ceremony at the funeral. And in the tomb of Tutankhamun, you will see him, who was a prime minister also, with the Waz scepter, the Az, opening the mouth to send the deceased on his way to the judgment. The Kep, K-H-E-R-P, was the director of the temple. And the Her, H-E-R, was the person over the temple. The Kerhem was a reciter of the liturgy, the person who read the books and knew the words to speak in worship of the god. And the Wab was considered the pure man, and he was the one who examined the animals for the sacrifice in the worship ceremonies and so forth. he also performed certain routines within the temple. The female priest, the priestesses, was first of all the Netahemth, and she was the divine wife of Amun. Often, when the king took the place of the god, of course the king himself was a god, his wife, he doubles, so to speak, as Horus. And we find that Horus, or Thoth, and Seshat were the two functionaries who performed some of the important functions. So the king represented or doubled as Thoth, and the queen represented Thoth's wife. Some say it's his daughter, Seshat, the lady with the star-pointed head. So we have king and queen. The Nemu Ni Amen, she was the great one of the harem of Amun. The Abit priestess, each temple, especially with a female divinity, had a number of ladies who administered to that goddess. The Seshet was the person who played the sistrum, or shook the sistrum, which was the symbol of Hathor. And the Sheyamot was the musicians. Oftentimes we see three ladies playing the harp and other musical instruments. So in essence then, this represents the priestly body, male and female, and their position in the hierarchy. There is what I call theoretical and practical responsibilities of the priest. The principal function of the priest was to protect the god. And you protect the god by creating a home that was secure and had all of the amenities to make the god feel comfortable. The building of the temple was a science of divine inspiration. That is to say, we credit the Heliopolis doctrine of creation of Ra and Memphis of Ptah. We credit Ptah with creating the world as we know it. But we are led to believe that there were two universes. So Ptah left the universe of the divine and stepped into this universe, and he began the creation process, where he made out of water, land, minerals, plants, animals, and finally, Ra does get credit with creating humans. But when we speak of Ptah, we must understand that there were at least 5 creation gods. Okay? Ra at Heliopolis, Ptah at Memphis, Thoth at Hermopolis, Khnum at Elephantine, Aswan, and Amun, later Amun-Ra here at Karnak. But most important, we must understand that we're not dealing with competing deities. These gods are complementary, not competing. It's like when you shine a light into an orb, you see different versions or different colors. So they are one in spirit, but they have several manifestations. The building of the temple was a divine inspired undertaking which required the pharaoh and his chief architect to be morally, spiritually, and intellectually fit You see, they had a tremendous task to create a house of perfection to encourage the God to come down on earth. And the God would look down and he says, I'm not going because everything is not okay. So the king and his chief architect had to be spiritually pure. They had to be morally pure. They had to be intellectually knowledgeable of every item that needs to be in place before the God would come down. And ultimately, there will be a divine umbrella of protection against evil forces. But that protection has to be, it's a work in progress. They have to be doing it all the time because evil can easily enter and corrupt the place that is supposed to be pure. In this, what I call the God business, there is what we say to be hypothetical, theoretical explication of what happens in the heavens. We really don't know. We look to the book of the pyramid text and the coffin text and the book of the dead and several of the other books of a religious nature to understand what happens up there. But we don't know. What we do know is what happens down here, that the king participates in. Okay, and it's believed that he mirrors what the book says. So, in the heavens, in the construction of the temple, Thoth and Seshat are the architects who create the parameters of what the temple would represent. And in the building of the temple, the king wears a headwear that mirrors Thoth and his wife Seshat. And they stretch the cord in outlining the dimensions of the temple and what's going to be in it. The ground is consecrated, and then the architect is given his marching orders to begin. And like I said, he had to be pure. He had to have been washed, purified, before he could undertake his functions. In this undertaking of building the temple, a number of things need to be remembered. First of all, when a temple is built, that sacred space is consecrated, so that even 1,000 years later, if another temple is built on that spot, that spot is stained, if you use the term, with consecration. It is holy. Doesn't matter. And one of the functions of the priest is to make sure that the holiness remains. Even if, let us say, enemies of the temple was to attack, the spiritual and human enemies was to attack the temple, the priests had to perform the ceremonies of cleansing to get rid of that, so that the site would retain its holiness. Second, as I indicated earlier, there are a number of different temples, types of temples. So Karnak is different from most others because many people built. So the same set of rules that apply to the temple that's built by an individual pharaoh is different to that temple that's built by a number of pharaohs. As I indicated, that Karnak is considered vegetative construction over 2,000-year period. Ramses III temple and Hatshepsut, even the mortuary temples of Ramusium and Medinet Habu, even Abu Simbel, they are built by one person, so built one time. And in building the temple, a foundation ceremony is performed. The interesting thing, and no one has actually, this is my own theory, that I want to believe that a temple such as Karnak, every addition to the temple had a foundation ceremony. So there would be a foundation ceremony for the first pylon. And as you build the 10 pylons throughout, there will be 10 foundation ceremonies. But they're different because of the dimensions of the temple and so forth. Nevertheless, the great French archaeologist who discovered the pyramid text in Saqqara, Maspero, he found evidence of the foundation ceremony at Deribari's temple and also at Luxor temple. Okay? So what is this foundation ceremony? So the site is chosen and you mark out the dimensions of the temple, where the temple will be, and on a level bed of clear white sand, an animal is sacrificed and the blood is allowed to flow as a first consecration. Then cartouches or chenou, with the name of the builder, in this case Hatshepsut, and over there it was Amenhotep III. So the cartouches will be placed in the cache. The cartouches, and then miniature samples of the tools to be used in building the temple. Then certain types of oils, perfume, unguents, incense, food, corn, oils, all of these things will be put in there and they'll be covered over. And of course, you have the individual reading the holy words so that you have the consecration or making whole the temple for good luck and successful completion. The dimensions of the temple. You see, an argument has been raised as to whether the Egyptians built a temple according to plan, or whether they just started building and adding. But in fact, I was in New York and I invited a friend and I showed him the plan of a temple. And this is a man very well read. And the first thing he did, he closed the book and said, "My God, it's a computer." The people who made the computer copied the planning of the temple. So the argument supports the idea that the Egyptians could construct a temple from a plan completely, and they knew where everything was going to be. The pylon, the court, hypostyle hall, the wajid, the sanctuary, the supporting rooms, rooms for clothing, food, perfumes, oils, incense, you name it. All of that was in the plan. We did not find any plans of a particular temple, but the argument from the absence of information doesn't hold, because tomorrow you can discover a plan, and therefore, so you have to give yourself a little leeway in accepting that they knew what they were doing. We're talking about a people with a high level, a high level of science, that for thousands of years, they're building up their body of knowledge. Okay, so it is not that Margaret Murray, in her book on the splendor of Egypt, she says that while the Greeks and the Romans can count their supremacy by the centuries, The Egyptians counted theirs by the thousands of years. So we're looking at a very long period of accumulated knowledge. They had plans that they built. So we know that, so we know what the dimensions will be and where everything, for example, like the great court here, where you have your altar, you have a number of rooms, the decoration, we got sphinxes, we got colonnades, we got pylons, we got statues, and you name it, then you enter into the various rooms, as I indicated. There's a hypostyle hall with the decoration on the walls of the ritual. The interesting thing is about, or I don't want to use the word contradiction, but the contrast between the ancient temples and the Greek temples. The ancients wrote on papyrus. They wrote the ritual on papyrus, and there were some illustrations on the walls of places like the hypostyle hall. With the Greek and Roman temples, they put everything on the wall based on the earlier versions of what was in the storehouses of knowledge. Okay, so that Manito, who was a Greek priest in Egypt in the 2nd century, he had access to all the information and he could write. So the builders of that time had access to information that you've gone to Dendera or Kamambo or Edfu, and you see all the information on the wall. There is something about that because in the earlier period, knowledge, which is power, it was kept in secret among people. The skills of the various crafts were transmitted from father to son in apprenticeship. And then his son, it's like this is my son, he's the first time in Egypt, and I was explaining to him my understanding of how the average people build their houses. So the father builds the first floor, and he leaves some columns in the air, and his son builds above his father. And then he does the same thing with the evidence of the steel, and he builds above. So the building is a process that not simply the building, but the skills are transmitted from father to son to son to son, and even the titles, the high religious titles in service of the priesthood, it's handed down in a hereditary manner from father to son, because I don't have all the information right now, but there's evidence that a grandfather held this high post and he gave it to his son, and his son gave it to the nephew, and so forth. We must consider the economics of the temple, because like everything else, if there's no money, there's a lot of problems. So when the king founds a temple, the king may make an endowment to the temple in land and some gold and what have you. But the priests themselves have to make the little bit that they get work over a long period. There's, in Christian tradition, there's a story of the great God giving 4 or 5 different people so many talents. They say God multiply. And there was one guy who got 1 talent and said, I don't want to lose my talent, so he dug a hole and put it into. And then when they reported back, this guy who got 5, he said, well, I made 25. He made 20. And this poor fella, he said, well, I don't want to lose mine, so I put it in a hole. And they took it away from him because if you give him the right to life, you have to make it worthwhile. In America, one of our great teachers talks about bringing good into the world, to be given the opportunity to live, you must do good. Good was the rule by which your people, the ancient Egyptians, lived, by the precepts of Ma'at, the goddess of truth, justice, righteousness, balance, order. All of these things made you a good person. When you get up there, after it's all over, the king, as well as other humans, you're going to be judged. What did you do? That is why in the negative confessions, or the justification of innocence, it is said, I didn't do this, and I didn't do that, and I didn't do this, and I didn't do that. I didn't do all these bad things. But there are also, they call them the negative confessions. But there's also the positive confessions. You see, I did this. I gave a coat to the poor man. He was freezing in the weather, and I gave him a coat. I gave, the widow had no husband. I gave her money and stuff to help with the children. And I did this, and I made a donation. So the negative and the positive outweigh. But the whole idea is that once given an opportunity to live on earth, you should be doing good, bringing good into the world. So the king made the endowment to the temple, and the temple people now had to make sure that whatever was given to them doesn't run out. So they created the land that they owned, they worked the land, and they sold the surplus products in trade. Some of the land, they rented it out and collected taxes. They made crafts, statues, and other forms of craft to be sold. They function as health centers that most of the population didn't know how to read and write. So what they would do is, okay, so I have some property, and before I die, I want to make sure that my daughter gets so much and my son gets so much. So I go to the temple to make a will. I want to address the government, and I need a paper, or I need to write a letter. I want my son to marry this man's daughter, so I have to write a letter to him to say that my son is a good child, and I go to the prison. And then also the temple served as hospitals, as schools. So all of these things made, and then especially during the Middle and New Kingdom, we have what is called the imperial pharaohs who went abroad. Amun gave them the curved sword, the scimitar, to wage war against people, bring booty, and develop my domain. And the kings would make endowments from the loot that they seized to the temple. So all of these things round out the economics of the temple. So we have the building on the economics and the theoretical, practical foundations, as well as the priesthood. Now, the purification practices. There is theoretical speculation and practical application. That is to say, the pyramid text, the coffin text, the Book of the Dead, the various books tells us what happens in the heavens. We know what happens on earth because we have an evidence of that. Oftentimes, it depends on whether you're the sleepy type. You get up at 6 and you say, the sun is up. No, the sun has been up since about 4 o'clock in the morning. The sun is awoken by Thoth and Horus, and he's given his bath attendants. They set the water, test the water to see it's not too hot. They don't want to burn the sun god, man. He's given his bath, he's toweled, a massage, perfumed, fixed. then he's called to his meal, his breakfast. He's given his implements of power, his scepter, his crown, and all of these things, and then he's slapped in the bottom and say, sail across the heavens on the goddess Nut's body. Nut gives the birth to the king in the morning, and at the end of the day, she swallows him up. She then gives birth to the stars and the moon. And then at the end of the night, just before, she's busy, just before she gives birth to the sun again, Nut puts aside the stars and the moon, and we repeat the whole thing again. So the king, the god is given his bath and he's sent on. Well, the same thing happens on earth with the king. As I said that there are different types of temples, but the mortuary temples on the West Bank, Medinet Habu especially, has evidence of, well, the mortuary temples each had a palace adjoining the first court. Many of them have that, the palace has been destroyed, but we know from what has remained, we can speculate as to all of them have. But Medinet Habu has evidence of the king leaving the palace to visit the temple. So he gets the same treatment that the god gets in the morning in the heavens. He's woken in the house of the morning. We call it, like today you call it the bathroom or whatever. He's given his bath and so forth. Same thing that I just said that happens to the god up there, happens to the king here. And then he is now required to visit the temple. When he gets to the temple, you've been across, you've seen the two gods, Thoth and Horus, baptizing the temple, the king. In Karnak, besides the sanctuary, in the little room to the back, we see the two gods baptizing Hatshepsut, but we also see evidence that Thutmose III's people chiseled out her name, her face, her image. Okay, so the king is baptized before he can enter the temple. The king is accompanied by the high priest of the temple. Okay, the king is the high priest at the pinnacle of the pyramid, but he cannot be in every temple, so he has a high priest. There's a major high priest, and then there's a minor high priest. So every temple has a high priest. So whichever temple he's going to visit, at the entrance to the temple, he's joined by the high priest of that temple. The high priest has to be purified before he can enter the temple. The temple, of course, you can go to sleep at night and lock up the temple, and the temple stays closed until the next morning. There's a book by a man named Guy Brunton, and he said that he was a mystic, and he asked to spend the night in the Great Pyramid in Cairo. And the Egyptian authorities said to him, "Are you crazy? Why do you want to spend the night in there? We lock up the pyramid and we go home." And he said, "Well, you know, I have a little kind of metaphysical knowledge." So they said, okay. He spent the night in the Great Pyramid, and he said that there were spirits of ancients living in the pyramid. And they said to him, the function of humans is to do good. Go out there and do good. Now, so when the end of the day, we lock up the temple, the king and the high priest comes in the morning to open the temple is asleep. The temple has to be awakened. The temple has to be consecrated, purified, so that the temple can come alive. Wake. the king and the priests would go to the various rooms in the temple and sprinkle holy water on incense, the statues, the rooms, everything. And then the temple is now ready for the day's proceedings. So therefore now the king leads a procession towards the sanctuary. And what is done for the God in heaven, the same thing is done for the God image who resides in the sanctuary, in the room, on the bark, in the nails. And he begins the procession. And he's followed by a whole host of people. Musicians, people reading from the book, people playing instruments, people carrying food, water, incense, flowers, oils, unguents, fire. They pass through, if we use Karnak now, the hypostyle hall. The function of the hypostyle hall is an area of procession, but it is a dividing line between the mundane and the sacred world. So once you step into the hypostyle hall, you've left that world of humans and you enter the world of the divine. And they move towards the sanctuary. And that area behind the hypostyle hall is called the wajit. Now, as you move further, the number of people following the king reduces. Sure, remember the musicians, they will be playing louder, but they don't go further. Only the essential people, until the king gets to the sanctuary area. So, we come to the sanctuary. The purification of the king is essential, because if the headman is not pure, then the people down here would not be pure. The baby that is born, that will become king, he has to be purified at birth. The young man growing, who becomes the crown prince, he is purified. Before he becomes king, at the death of the old king, everything stops. The nation is in mourning. It's like if you have an artery and it's cut and blood is gushing. The people are sad, they're crying everything, the king is dead. The king is now taken to the place of mummification, where he is washed over a 70-day period. That 70-day period is called the ascension. The crown prince has to, over the 70-day period, he has to visit all of the holy shrines from north to south. Gets on his boat, sails, and it goes to all these holy sites. After the 70-day period, the dead king is buried. He's washed again at the ceremony, at the tomb. The same priest with the Az performs the opening of the mouth ceremony, and he is locked in this tomb. The tomb is a dividing line between this world and the next, the spiritual world. Now he begins his journey. Foucault had indicated that there is a place at Dir el-Bahri, a cavern, where the deceased enters to begin the journey to the Hall of Judgment. It is said that the tree goddess pours 4 pitchers of water on him on the way. When he gets closer, there are 21 pylons that he has to navigate that are guarded by different spirits. He has to know their names. And then he goes in, Horus and Thoth and Amit, and they examine him, and he is found to be justified or purified. Then a divine messenger comes back to earth and says to the people waiting, he made it. Now you can begin the coronation. And the king now begins the coronation where he becomes king. Horemheb was coronated at Karnak, but he had to go to Heliopolis where he gets the full treatment and he becomes a king and a god. Pianke, the Ethiopian, 25th dynasty, he was on his way to Heliopolis, where Heliopolis is where sun god Ra originated with the Book of the Dead and what have you, the pyramid text. And he washed his face in the cool pool. So once you get to Heliopolis, you become a true king and a god. So what do we use for purification? Well, incense. Incense is used to cast away evil spirits. Water is to wash away things. You look at, there was a time when before the dam, the first dam and the second dam, the inundation flooded the entire land. And the boundary marks were removed. And then the engineers would have to come back and resurvey the whole land. So water cleanses, it washes away. Food, the food that is given to the god that ultimately the people eat has to be purified, washed. And the various utensils. The utensils are either made of gold or silver or even copper. So this brings us now to the entrance of the temple. We talk about what happens when they enter the hypostyle hall, the sanctuary area. So as the procession is reduced and the king and the high priest gets to the door of the sanctuary, the two of them alone enter. The king opens the door, he got his own key, whatever, and he says, "Good morning, sir." He's speaking to the God living in there. He says, "I'm here to do my duty today. I'm here to worship you. I'm a priest of this temple. I have no ill intentions." He said, "I have to remove your image from the nails. I need your permission to put my hands on you." He doesn't just go in and pick up the statue. He has to ask the God for permission to pick up the statue. And when he does, they begin the ceremony in there, reading the books, singing the songs. The high priest is incense in the room and what have you. And they're finished. He gets the full treatment which we mentioned earlier. He gets his food, he gets his symbols, and then they put him back to rest until. This is done 3 times in the day. In the morning, he gets a heavy breakfast. He gets a light lunch and a snack in the evening, and then I'll see you tomorrow. And then the king backs away from the god by using a branch of the hidden HIDN tree, a branch, and he removes his footprints from the sand that engulfs the room. And as he goes back, he's speaking to the god, he's singing, and then he closes the door and says, "I'll see you tomorrow." That's what happens in there. So, just let me summarize, and I want to thank you for your attention. So let me summarize what I've tried to convey to you. So, the sun god is purified upon rising on the horizon before he begins his trek across the heavens. The king is similarly purified in the Perduet, which is the house of the morning, unweighted before he visits the temple, which is required to. 3, at the temple he is purified before entering, so too is the high priest. The temple has to be purified before they can actually begin the ceremony. The man who would be king is purified at birth. As a young man, he's purified. He's purified at coronation on a daily basis against spiritual enemies and actual enemies, human enemies. Before he takes the field of battle, he's going to battle against the enemies of Egypt, physical enemies. He has to be purified. Okay, one of the Middle Kingdom pharaohs, he died on the field of battle. Second Enre Tao, Second Enre, and his son Second Enre Tao, and his skeleton, his mummy's in the Cairo Museum, but you see he has a big gash on his head. He probably got hit with an axe. So that means that, and then he has to get what you call a battlefield mummification, and so forth. So he's the dead king is washed at the mummification. Then he's sent on his way to the burial. On the way to the hall of the double Marti for judgment, the tree goddess washes him. He gets to the hall. He's examined. He's declared to be justified before he can enter heaven to live in this place of purity where the eternal spirits live. He's again washed before he enters the realm of the blessed and to begin his eternal existence among the godly spirits. We must understand that the washing and the fumigation is to give the deceased, the dead person, to bring him alive in the next world, to bring his bodies together, to have him so that he can move around as a spirit, not to dismember. The head is over there, the hands here. All of this here, the words, the washing, the purification, the incense and all of that allows him to now become in the next world just as he was in this world. Further, Dr. Ben Johanan, who's I named this lecture series after him, he insisted on contemporary purity in clothing, in behavior. Respect the culture. Don't enter the sanctuary. You people who are workers in the temple, you are keeping the tradition alive. You have the permission, and some of the guides, the permission to enter the sanctuary. Well, we don't. Okay? And I've said this before, that I saw some people in the temple yesterday. I think they were going swimming, young women, with hardly any clothes on. And the guides, and you have to insist that the guides tell the people there's a dress decorum. They don't go into European churches and cathedrals was half naked. So why should they do it here? So there's a proper attire to enter the temple. He also advised paying attention to the architectural features of the temple. As I said, the incense, the clothing, the cosmetics, the oil, the food, the sacred literature, the words of praise, the hymns, the music, the purified utensils made of gold, silver, copper, the hidden tree, and the roll of fire in the whole process. This is what creates the purification, and the administrators of the temple, the priests, function so that thousands of years later, there was something that they were doing that makes us still here today. You know, some people want to believe that the Egyptian gods are no more. That's not true. They may have retired far away into the heavens, but they're still looking. And they expect us to do right, good, justice, righteousness. I want to thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for our colleague and friend, Dr. Fred Monderson, about this lovely presentation about priest and purification in the Egyptian temples. Dr. Fred Monderson take us on the priest's life, building economy, and in the purification, he took us to the Book of the Dead Sea across the heavens, and he talked about Karnak, Medinet Habu, pyramids, and the messages between the God and the king. And the main good idea he talked about it this time is the function of the temples and each place in the temple and the materials which used by the priest to make the purification for the king, and how the king should have the blessing before going to the weir by the priest. That means that the priest was the main person in the ancient Egyptian civilization, was the main character. It is not the king, but the priest who was behind the king and behind the country.
The ball behind the throne.
Yes. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate that you coming from America to us here and to cut this time to be with us in Karnak Temple. Karnak is your home, and thank you very much for your great work and great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Please, if you have any question to our... Please.
After your question, Dr. Mohammed, I want to ask some questions. We say now, first God, his name is Amun-Ra or Amun-Ra Bidah. The first question. And if we have a lamb in that room, we see something in that room. It is symbols, and without Adam and Eve, no foundations for human body, maybe you are symbols.
طيب عشان ابقى فاهم السؤال بالظبط. السؤال الاول هو امون ورع وبتاع عمليه الربط او الثلاثي ربط الالهه مع بعض. مظبوط؟
I will answer some.
Please.
Okay. Amun was an independent god. There was what is called syncretism. So Amun was joined to Ra. Ra was a simple, Amun one god, Ra one god. And they combined to form one god with two sets of powers. And then Amun combined with men to form another set of powers. So by compounding the power, by joining, the gods are getting greater and greater and greater. And especially in the later period, the Greco-Roman period, you have a number of Ptah, Sokar, a number of gods that were combined. At Abydos, we're familiar with Osiris, but Osiris is not the original god. They had Kenti-Amenti and Unefa, and there's another one, and then Osiris. So what has happened is that Osiris got all of these gods' powers. So this is the mind of the priests who create this compounding of power, spiritual power, psychic power, intellectual power, and so forth. The Adam and Eve thing, it's not Egyptian. Okay, it's across the water, the Mediterranean.
I would like to thank our colleague, Mr. Abdelkarim, friend of Dr. Fred Monderson, who makes the plea for this presentation, and for our head, Mr. Abdel Sattar Badli, and Dr. Mahmoud, and all of you. And please, if you have any second questions. Then, to conclude, thank you very much for your time, and hope to see you next time.
Yes. I already had an idea what I would like to speak about next time. So, it is an honor for me to be here. I've been in love with this temple. I've walked all over this temple. I've taken photographs of a lot of this temple, and I feel at home in this temple. The last time, I have a poem about this temple, actually 2 poems. one about Amud, one about Ra, and then one about the temple itself, which I did the last time, I think, or so forth. So thank you very much.
شباب بالنسبة